Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fifth official DefCore meeting. We are having a board presentation tomorrow, and so this is effectively our roundup and prep for that. We've got a couple things on the agenda, and of course we're running off of the Etherpad. It's a pretty packed agenda because some of the things at the end I think are going to generate a lot of discussion. So the two things I know that we're going to need discussion time for and will act as time cop on to make sure we don't go too long are the TC's designated code proposal and response around that. And also the recent FUD around the different efforts that are, in my opinion, aligned with what we're doing, but potentially ahead in some ways. So we should definitely talk about that and have a position, because I think the press is eager for us to have an official position.
The press has invented one for us.
So actually, I'll yes, I will stage this very simply by saying that the thing that we want to do is really have a formal position from the board, and I think we need a recommendation for that position.
Do you want to have that discussion as we get to it in the agenda, or should we keep it on?
No, at the agenda, because otherwise we're going to suck all the air out of the meeting, and I don't want to do that. So if it's all right with everybody, the two big topic items I'm going to hold until the end, and we will try and bracket those into 20-minute blocks. Let me say it this way. We're going to reserve 40 minutes, and we're going to stop 20 minutes into the first topic. If we can do better than that, we will. Anything else to add to the agenda before we go? There's one item that we keep pushing forward, and I will make not as a not discussed,
which is
the program versus project.
Well, that's part of the answering questions from TC's. Well, okay.
No,
you're right. They're related.
Okay. Thing.
Yep.
So, just as a very short note on that. I have something that Josh and I are working on. I don't want this distracting us right now, and I hopefully we'll make some progress there after this coming board meeting.
Update on criteria scoring process. We're not going to do additional scoring today, correct?
Right. This is not a working meeting. I'll quote working. I think it's really helpful to do those as standalone meetings, and we're making a lot of progress. So we'll talk about an update, and then we'll set some times to do it. So along those lines, status update. So
Alan's arrived. You're late.
Good to see you.
Perfect timing. Grab
good
it.
timing.
Squeeze you in here somewhere. Sorry, folks, we're just shuffling a little more space around the table.
I heard another chime in. So if you could, if you're not on the roll call, please add yourself to the roll call and/or announce yourself.
Hi, this is Mark Radcliffe.
Man, and all right. So I'm getting feedback. So from a status update and calendar review, I wanted to go high level a little bit. We had set some pretty aggressive timelines for getting the first Havana DefCore work done before the summit. I think we're at risk on that because I believe we're about 2 weeks behind where I'd like to be with at least 2 weeks with the RefStack TCUP work. I actually think we're on track with the criteria scoring if we agree to make one adjustment, which is that we're going to score at the criteria level, not at the test level for this pass.
Capabilities level.
The capabilities level. So,
well, that's what we have been doing.
We're scoring there, but originally we'd said we were going to do a criteria score for every test, and then we would select test by test. What
Oh, no,
I'm going to
that's-
recommend we do, based on our experience so far, is that we score at the criteria, at the capability level.
At the capability level, and the test basically inherits.
And just to make that more explicit, we're essentially saying for a capability to be must-have, it means all of the tests that test that capability must pass.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not a,
Yeah, essentially every
test that exercises
inherits
that
the
capability.
score, essentially. So if it's,
That's the new
well, no, but the
route.
reverse is,
Just find a list of the existing scores and what still needs to be scored.
yeah, we can share that with you. Again, I think
We'll talk
I
about
mentioned
that.
this, yeah, we'll get to that in just a second.
So we're going to hold this as, I think this is a no-brainer decision. So I'm going to document it, I think, as a decision, and then we'll review it after we get through the capability update.
Mhm.
But I can't talk about schedule without making that simplification statement, because I think it's necessary. That puts some extra weight on Troy, who's been leading our capability classification effort, but I feel pretty good about that.
I mean, I think they're pretty solid.
I think they're pretty
I
solid.
wanted to rework them one more time.
yeah, I'd over-compress them, I think. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna go back and do one. What I'll probably try to do in the next week is, basically make a modification and take the current spreadsheet that you guys have and sort of propose an alternative one that maps what you guys have into the new categories. I mean, we're literally talking out of the 70 categories that are there, there's maybe 4 or 5 that may tweak. It's a very minor, less than 10%, I think, change. There's just a few that are single function capabilities with 2 tests that probably don't need to be standalone capabilities that could be collapsed. That's probably the only thing. And then there's some naming in there just to make it a little bit more clear about what's an extension versus not. But I think it makes everything simpler.
So that actually, I think, is we have a whole set of non-findings or negative findings that are coming out of the committee. Like, we have explicitly not made a point of distinguishing between extensions and core code.
Right.
Because it's a TC designation and a decision that can change over time. What we're saying is, from the user-facing perspective, we expect these things to be in or out.
Right, and the only reason to label them as extensions, the only reason I changed the naming is to make them map to the docs. So you get a much clearer mapping between the name of the capability and what you can go find in one of the docs.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the only tweaks, and I think that'll be pretty minor and pretty easy to get done. Certainly by the end of next week, I'll have that finished.
And I actually think there's tremendous value in itself, the capability mapping. I think people will really appreciate it.
A lot of people that have looked at it, I think, have gotten it. It gives a lot of clarity of sort of what is there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which, to me, makes a nice landing spot for the work we're doing, because people can come in and immediately see something, get.
Yeah.
It's like a compass, a map.
So Rob, when you were saying you feel like we're 2 weeks behind, I was trying to flush out the set of things that we're doing and kind of which ones are done and not done.
Okay.
As a way of saying, so we originally said we have to do requirements for RefStack even before we start the rest of this process, so development can happen in parallel. I think it took us longer to get productive with the official Stackforge process than we would have liked. So I would say on the RefStack side, we're a couple weeks behind, which maybe is where this sense of being behind the 8 ball comes from.
Yeah.
On the capabilities list and the scoring criteria and applying criteria to capabilities, I actually think we're about where I thought we would be. I don't feel like we're behind on that terribly.
Yeah, I think this is on track.
And we've had a couple of things coming out there where we did want to set time aside to review the criteria after we'd applied it the first time, to get a sense of, we have a dozen, do we really need all 12? Could we be doing the same job with 8 of them? Are there a few of them that really don't have a material effect? Do we need to consider weighting them, which is one thing that we've talked about passing on for the Havana cycle, and just say, let's leave them all at evenly weighted. Bob and I were talking earlier out of band about does it require admin credentials criteria as being kind of distracting, and either should be a Boolean definition of is therefore not core, or it shouldn't be a criteria at all, and we should just acknowledge that some core capabilities require admin.
You're jumping ahead.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
Great question. But I do think that we decided that the weighting was not yet, so we're not behind with that. I think that we're finding the criteria are pretty useful. So we have as far as I can tell, and I'll be interested as we get the community engaged, but I feel very confident that these criteria are useful. All 13 are useful.
12.
I think that's one.
No.
That was 13.
I think there's only 12.
The duck made it 14.
I can't count.
The duck is the 14th.
11, 12, 13. Oh, non-admin is the 13th. Sorry. The one I wanted to throw out.
So, yeah, and so I think we haven't talked about weighting yet. I think we'll get there. But so far, and please jump in, I don't see any reason to not start exposing this to a broader audience after the board meeting.
Okay.
So.
And I think we're doing a bang-up job of highlighting and identifying the places where we think decisions will be contentious or that are worth having a conversation about. In other words, at least this will reduce the amount of details we need to talk over with a larger audience to say, these things are obviously in, these things are obviously out for now, here are the things that are on the bubble and why. Which is the goal.
And then there are the activities of weighting and threshold for coreness. Both are not, we're not expecting to get there yet. So
right.
That'll be April that we'll have some meetings that do that. So hopefully we'll have all the criteria weighted, and then we can actually have people play with it and see, or all the criteria, all the capabilities scored, and then we can start playing with these things to see if there's things to do.
Curiosity, has there been any thought to soliciting as at least one feedback, one element of the decision, sort of a crowdsourcing? What do you all think is?
So you're way behind the 8 ball, which means I'm going to call point of order. You didn't do your homework before you came to the meeting. The whole point of building the RefStack tool is to allow everybody in the world to run a test and then submit it along with their opinions of which capabilities should be core.
So it's both
so yeah,
factual
it's the number
and
one
opinion.
thing we're trying to do.
Okay.
We're behind the 8 ball on building it. We spent since 9 a.m. this morning working on that workflow, is upload test results. And then the next requirement in that backlog is upload test results with suggested scoring, or suggested must-have.
But it is worth talking through the process for this.
Yeah.
What we're expecting to do is we've got a workable capabilities list, workable criteria. Those were, and I think the report to the board is we think we have both of those things pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
That means it's time to start getting feedback more broadly on, are these capabilities right, and are these criteria right? And so get the community involved in that, and at the same time we're building up the crowdsourcing. That's exactly the word that I like.
Mm-hmm.
Capability to do that, and that would probably be something that we would start after the summit. So this
I
path,
actually disagree. I would
I'd love to get
really
it
like
sooner.
to get the data in before the summit so that the initial slate, because the board meeting is at the summit, the initial slate has the data. But there's 3 criteria widely deployed, used by tools and used by clients that are intended to represent the crowdsourced data. And, Troy represents sort of one category of the public cloud operator. And we've also been soliciting in back channel folks like George Reese and Andrew Schaefer and people that have vocal opinions. We'd rather get their opinions ahead of time rather than wait to get them afterwards on, do they believe these represent, the used by clients argument is really, is it built into Fog? Is it built into Bodo? Are people actually consuming those APIs? Are they using the XML ones or the JSON ones? And the folks who've been building those tools and Stratus and Service Mesh and everyone else have the best grasp of the APIs they think get used. And so trying to get those folks to provide feedback as early as possible, I think, will really help.
That's actually what I'm really worried about, is how much feedback, how long is it going to take us to get that feedback?
Which is why we're trying to make the user experience of running RefStack and TCUP as easy as possible. So it's like on your laptop with your default set of credentials pointed against your cloud environment, go, you get this little web interface with 75 capabilities, and you can mark the ones that you couldn't live without.
It's not just an ease question.
duration or like engagement and promotion?
And this is why I think that you're going to see us do the preliminary one at the, around the summit as part of the summit, and I think that will get people to pay attention. Their ears will go up, and then when we start talking about the plus 90 for Icehouse, that's where people are going to get much more serious. But we've got to get the process worked out for Havana. So
yeah, we put a summit session.
If people vote for it, which is now closed, so.
Is it?
No, it's going to midnight tonight.
It goes to midnight?
Nice.
It's not
You'll
UTC
get out the
midnight,
vote.
it's actually.
I heard it was Central Time midnight is what I thought I heard.
That'd be a nice change, because the UTC thing threw a lot of people off for voting.
Send the link
I
out.
saw something about extending.
I did, no, I got something.
Tweeted it.
Yep.
Yeah. The other thing that we should consider doing is targeted outreach. I mean, yes, there are lots of users of clouds and deployers of clouds, but as far as libraries and tools, there's a couple dozen.
Well,
right?
okay,
and
so
we can make that list and go and deliberately canvas.
I'm gonna start building our next agenda.
Okay.
So I'd like that to
Future
be
agenda.
Elephant.6 agenda, yeah.
Right.
And so what I'd like us to have on that list is how to get users of, how to get crowdsourced data. Because what we need is a plan.
I think Alan should go door to door.
Okay.
Can I carry the Google camera too?
Yes, cloud to cloud.
But so I think that's a very reasonable thing for us to start talking through the deployment plan. I am expecting us to go to the board and the TC and have that body, because that's actually a statistically relevant sample, it's over 30, to say, everybody run this, collect data, get some experience so that we have a controlled environment.
Don't forget we get the data from the board.
Yeah. I want to make sure we get the tools worked out, the kinks, so my concern is actually that we fan too quickly, and so I think we can manage it.
There's going to be a lot of interest in contributing.
There's going to be a lot of what?
I think there's a lot of interest. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of interest, at least in those initial phases of getting the data. But I do think it's a balance point, because the tools are a mess and we can't get the data in pretty easily, then we may miss people. But I think we're doing the right thing by trying to get it right and trying to make it simple.
We've got our SEs lined up to run it as part of validation every time they do an install, right? Like just run it and upload the data.
I can get that done for our private and public side, so we'll have the same thing set up.
I think if we set people's expectations correctly, we won't plug them well.
I think so. I think we're doing okay with that right now.
Okay.
All right, we are now talking about an agenda topic for the next meeting. I'm going to keep us on it. But I've elevated our decision point. So at tomorrow's board meeting, we're going to be asking to take the capabilities and criteria, which is a very narrow thing, to the broader audience, right? As part of this thing, we have to say, all right, here's criteria, here's capabilities list that we've got, here's how they're coming together.
How much time will we got on the agenda tomorrow?
I told Rob I'd give you whatever you wanted.
Okay.
I told Rob that.
Yeah. I know. Probably fair.
I was just kidding.
I was an asshole to Ben. You should bring it around.
I like for us to be, in these meetings, crisp, that we're actually we have a formal action. We can put together a simple resolution.
When you say capabilities, are we going to finish the spreadsheet?
No, just the 75, not all the scoring. So we just
show what the capabilities.
Here's the horizontal axis. Here's the vertical axis. Let's go through that. The scoring we don't have done, but we can talk about sort of what we're seeing from the first part.
So we did take the criteria to the board last meeting.
We did not.
Not at this level.
Not the 13 criteria we're applying. We took the notion that we were developing it.
Yeah.
We didn't go through the 13. I don't think.
I don't think we went through the criteria.
We took it to the gold member directors.
Oh,
we didn't take it to the board.
Okay.
Too many meetings. You missed that one.
I missed that one.
Yeah.
That's cool. So we'll actually do that. But what I'm looking for is not the board, but to start canvassing it more broadly, right? The TC needs to get involved in reviewing these things. Because until we had about half of them scored, which is I think where we are right now, I wasn't that confident that we had them right. Now I'm feeling pretty good. So
I'm thinking, the reason I'm asking about time is because we can do it as just a presentation of an interim report with no board motion, or we could say we'd like, you know, as an interim action, the board to approve that these are the criteria and capabilities.
Yeah, I wanna.
If we do the latter, we're gonna need discussion time, and now I'm trying to think ahead to, are there any of those 13 that are gonna be contentious, right? The Shuttleworth one will be, if we...
But hold on, we do need to go through them, but I'm not asking for us to approve them as is.
Right.
What I'm asking for is that we take them to a broader audience, that we
for feedback.
So we socialize them more broadly for feedback.
Well,
And then, because I think we're not going to be able to actually have a final motion on this until the board meeting where we approve the slate.
I agree, and we still need a chance for the committee to come back to them and say, we've decided to throw this one out.
Uh-huh.
We don't really want...
We definitely don't want the board to act on that. All we want to do is say, we think here's our progress, we think this is good. Before, I want to allow a board member to throw up their hands and say, whoa, I'm not comfortable with the whole process, because I think it's a legitimate thing to get raised.
Mm-hmm.
I want it out. So every step where we increase the exposure to this work, I'd like to have the board say yes and socialize.
as I mentioned to you, we need to start, I've had several board members go, I don't get it, what are we doing?
Yeah.
We're losing track, you know.
We have to do a recap.
I'll walk through everybody.
People are going, okay, I see the tail and I can feel the trunk, but what is this thing? So we
And
need to describe the elephant again, what's the goal?
I wish you'd been on the gold member call, because the thing that was helpful for them that I think we have to make every DefCore call prefaced with is, here are the set of things we've focused on, here are the things we've explicitly deferred till later. And I started by saying we've deferred a compatibilities mark and the use of API compatible until later on.
Yeah.
And then everyone's like, oh, okay, we don't have to have the conversation. Because otherwise it comes up as the first question, and then we get sidebarred into why we're not talking about API compatibility right now, we're talking about interop.
Okay. I know that in the, if you read the proposal from the TC that we'll get to, it's for, paragraph 3 in that one.
Yeah.
So, that's, I think this is the right strategy of, chipping things away, but people definitely want to jump ahead. All right.
The one really
Well,
contentious thing that we have to provide guidance on, because we've said it's in the TC's hands, but it's actually not, is when we put the principles the board voted on, we agreed to the fact that the designated sections would be under the control of the PTLs. That's the language the board approved. But we've gone to the TC and said, TC, please provide guidance on this. And the problem is, the sticky one is still Swift, and now the PTL's not even on the TC, which was not the case when we drafted the principles. So now we have the issue of the TC going, oh, do we have authority over this? Because then we don't have to make it something that the PTL likes.
Did we actually
I
say?
think the TC issue is broader than that. There's not a consensus that the TC thinks it's a good idea at all.
Yes, we're about to talk about that too.
Yeah, all right.
What did you?
He's saying there's no consensus that the TC thinks designated sections are a good idea. At all.
Yeah, no, I've been, Mike, I've been on this, in those meetings now. Let's get there. We're not there yet. So we fuzzed into the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
You had these additional findings?
Sorry, I've lost my place again. Which document am I in? I'm in the wrong doc. Okay, I was in the wrong.
You had additional findings in committee.
Oh, yeah, so the process of depreciation and stuff, it came up really during the last criteria scoring round that there are overlapping things like glance image versus Nova image, where the position of DefCore is going to be that only one of those can be a core API, because they both do the same thing. But it puts us in a delicate position of taking existing widely used APIs and saying this is not going to be core because there are two APIs that do the same thing. And that we really should be more careful about producing that kind of circumstance in the future, but for now, we're going to rely directly on the TC's recommendation of what the future path is, and recommend that for core, as soon as it's possible that it is stable enough and documented enough for core. Which means we may have critical APIs that are not in core in the first version of this, because the stable and documented one is being deprecated and the new one is undocumented. Which is like, it's a crappy position to be in.
It was especially problematic, and Rocky was doing a really good job with this, of, well, if you're looking at Havana, it changes your
right.
Oh, shit, that's clearly deprecated because we've already written the code that deprecated it.
Yeah.
So, it ends up, it's a little bit of a time machine for Havana, which is why I want us to catch up. But it's good. So I threw this in the agenda, the Elephant 6 agenda.
And the documentation from quite a number of people use if there's not a test for it, that's a form of documentation, because if it's not tested, it doesn't work.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, the capabilities list is built exclusively from tests.
Right.
So if there's no test, it's not even in the list.
And so,
We're not
it's
even
not
considering
core.
Right.
No way.
Oh, yeah, additional recommendations on nomenclature is just the projects versus program stuff, which we're explicitly deferring for today.
But haven't totally dropped.
Yeah.
There are people who, with good memories, who will remember that we have outstanding commitments to
Sorry, we should put on the agenda that we haven't looped back with our dear friends from HP on the legal side of this, bylaws amendments and all of that, remember? Eileen is leading a subcommittee on that
Yeah,
effort.
so
We should at least get a status update from them.
I don't think they've had a meeting.
I think they have.
Really? I was.
There's one scheduled for the 15th.
Okay. I'm happily ignoring the legal side of this.
Yeah, I've been on it, and there's actually a position. I'd have to go back to my notes. There's a position that we're trying to do, and we need. There is a very rational approach to this, which includes leaving things open as far as the way the bylaws are being defined, and I think that we're making good progress with it. It leaves, we have to, the key question with this, I guess, is becoming an agenda item, was can the TC be a proxy, or the user committee be a proxy for community in certain cases, as far as some of the changes we're thinking of making to the bylaws. So what the idea, I don't know if I really want to go into this. It's off the agenda. So it's a really interesting conversation. It's just not urgent.
Where are we at?
We're
link to current scoring sheet. Can we be careful? We're passing around the one that has open edit credentials on it, right?
Oh.
The reason I hadn't passed it out before is because it's world writable.
That's the one that I put in there is also the one that's on the DefCore 4 list, by the way.
Anyone who has
You
a
wanna
link
just
can
crank it
comment. Yeah, okay, that's fine. It's actually fine now. I'm the owner and you're the editor, I think. Or am I looking at the same sheet?
Nope.
Yeah, I can't actually change it. It looks like I can comment.
Oh, yeah, okay. This is great. I'm the owner and an editor. Okay, so I can fix this so that all the committee members have edit privileges. That'll probably be easy.
Okay.
So this is comments by the world. Okay, that's right. Troy, if I add you as an editor, then you can also add other people. It's Terminator or the other one?
Okay, so while you add a couple people,
Just use the T-Terminator.
I will not assume that everybody understands where we are, and I'll do a very short update.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit of repetitive from the last DefCore meeting. So fundamentally, we have taken all of the tests. There's well over 1,000. We've broken them down into capability groups, and you'll see that on the left. With this, and some capability groups have a lot of tests, and some of them are very sparse. Troy's actually taking another pass to help clean this up, and we feel like there's 76. There'll be probably about 80 capability groups. We feel like this is a pretty good reflection of the test coverage for OpenStack. there is no doubt after our review that there are significant gaps in test coverage for projects that are important to the community, and that's a whole other topic that we're expecting to address in the next cycle. But for now, we feel like this is a good set of capabilities. And then in previous work, we'd spent time coming up with 13 criteria that we would use to score the tests, score now the capability groups. Those are reflected as the column headings here. And then, and I don't want to go through all those. You can link to the page and review them. We spent a lot of time coming up with them, and the definitions are in the comments to make it easier. And what we did was we had a resolution that we would weight these tests, these criteria. For now, we've postponed that action, so they're all evenly weighted. And what we've been going through is going through these capability groups, score them, 1 or 0 if we've made a yes or no decision, 0.5 if we feel like that needs further discussion, which turns out to actually work pretty well for allowing us to parking lot things and not have to make a decision as far as the score goes. And you can see that there's been some things that were easy. We've picked hard and easy. We've picked up and down across the spectrum of the projects as far as the capabilities go, new and old, and we've gone through the scoring exercise. The scoring typically takes the first couple tests somebody's doing. It takes about 20 minutes to get into the groove. And once you've gotten into the groove of it, we're scoring a capability in 5 minutes or so, especially if we have domain experts. It's been my experience in listening to people score that it can be fairly objective about capability by criteria by criteria, and where they're not, it's pretty easy to give it a 0.5 and move on. So one of the things that's important to me with this is that we can be objective in discussions and that we don't get pulled into a rat hole on disagreements. We've managed this process seems to be efficient enough to work everything through. Granular enough that we don't get caught up in a major capability group, but detailed enough, but high level enough that it's actually, we're not trying to score 1,000 tests. And so what I would suggest people do, I don't want to do it here because we have probably at least another 4 hours of meetings to rehearse this. But it's really helpful to go through and look at a line. I will point out that what we've done is we just took a swag of I think 65 as the cutoff point, and then no, it must be 50 as the cutoff point for whether or not whatever the cutoff score would be. And so you'll see things coming in and getting scored for that. Is it 65? How did this guy end up at 58?
I want to fix the conditional formatting.
So that seems pretty effective. The test that we thought would be core sort of passed the test. I strongly recommend people outside of the meeting take a couple of lines for capabilities that you're intimately familiar with and see if you agree with the scoring. If you're not, throw comments in or raise it. And then I threw an item in at the bottom that just sort of helped see if there was variation from the criteria. And so what that tells me, if there's a high score, that means there's very little variation. If there's very little variation, then that criteria is not necessarily helping us pick test. It's just a feel-good thing. And the good news is, for the most part, the criteria we have are actually creating some differentiation and helping us pick capabilities.
Well, correct myself. That's where we picked 65. The criteria weighted, you rated about 50.
So I just changed it now. What I did was I made it above 70 is green, below 60 is red, and in between, which we would consider to be on the bubble for now, I'm leaving it empty.
Okay. I would appreciate it if you have a 0.
Oh, sure, sorry. We had that before.
Unscored, yeah.
Yep.
Fix it. Thank you.
So I can't see the formulas on those.
The conditional formatting is hidden. You have to look under format, conditional formatting.
Which is grayed out.
Maybe because I'm editing it right now.
I just figured it's probably because I don't have rights, which is fine, I don't need the rights, I'm just saying. So you're gonna have to explain to people.
So I believe that if we got a good group of people together, we could do this in two additional 2-hour meetings. So another 4 hours of effort, I think, to be complete on this pass. Which once again is not the answer. It is enough to have people look at this and have a reaction, which is really our goal at this point. Because that's, you know, and I actually want to step back and remind people. The goal at this pass is to get people to review it, and if they're going to get upset, right? What we really don't want to have happen is for people to look at this and say, but really have an issue, and then we miss that. So our goal is actually for people to react, respond, and understand what's going on. So everybody cool with where we are with this? Do you have anything to add from my synopsis?
No, I think that's exactly right. Rob obviously cares more about building consensus than I do. I just want everyone to know what I said.
And I'm still nervous that we're going to derail this process by somebody shouting at the end, you know, you killed my pet project. And
Oh, it was stillborn. You've just been trying to resuscitate it for years. Stop beating the dead horse.
So,
sorry.
Yeah,
I think
we'll have those.
we will have those, and the only
Actually,
reasonable defense is to say we've been going through this as a group.
Been doing this for 18 months or years, really. You had a chance.
There were a lot of meetings. You, in fact, were probably a committee member at one point in stuff. So, fairly sure we can use that one.
So I think we're in good stead, but please be advised there's going to be another couple hours. I know I'm not available because I'm on vacation next week, and so I'll let you run it. And maybe you can just get it done while I'm gone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for volunteering. All right. So without more discussion, are we ready to move on from that? I'm happy to entertain conversation.
Alan, sorry, random housekeeping thing. I was looking back at our action items from the rest of the DefCore meetings for Elephant, and I had requested a list of all the licensees from Mark and Jonathan to make sure we could canvass them for input. I never got it, so if you can follow up with Jonathan, that would be super helpful.
Yep.
Escalating the process.
Need to get more.
Yeah, sure.
Just deleted.
Which step?
Actually, you know what? David might have got them, to be honest. He pre-populated RefStack, but the problem was the point of contact stuff was all broken. It was like who was supposed to be the point of contact for interop for each of the vendors. And I think that we had gone into the database, but it was the wrong point of contact. It ended up being the training team people. Anyway, it's still something we need to escalate back with the foundation stuff.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Worst case, it's every corporate sponsor, which means a couple hundred. Just call them one at a time.
And Etherpad is getting unhappy for me.
Sucks to be you.
Sorry, I'm going to learn it a lesson. There we go.
Okay, that was update on Critieria scoring process. We are on to board demo of TCU, of TCUP. What happened to the P?
I have to refresh.
So it is running on my laptop right at the moment, and so in theory, it looks like we might actually be able to demo this tomorrow.
So wait, backing up for people who haven't been watching every intimate detail. We committed to do a board demo of the RefStack TCUP work. It's a very preliminary demo. So we have TCUP is Tempest in a container upload from probe. To forgive me force fitting the acronym. But the idea is that the whole process works by crowdsourcing. So we want people to be able to run Tempest against their cloud or whatever cloud they have credentials for, and then upload the result to RefStack for compilation. And so the way we're trying to do that, to make it work very simply, universally in both in public and private clouds, is to containerize that work. And we've been making actually a lot of progress in doing that. I think we had an all-day meeting today. I think we've reached a point where we can now show the board, hey, you can actually run a probe, Tempest run against the endpoint. And then I don't know if we'll have the actual upload pieces working, but we're very close to that. The containerized piece is actually the critical part from our perspective, because that's the one that we need to have a lot of people do. Posting to a website, that's not as big a deal. And really important in that, and one of the things we spent a lot of time on today, was this is also now in Stackforge, and so people collaborating on this project are now also eligible to be ATCs, which has been really important for our contributors being able to get around copyright and be part of the OpenStack community. So rather than committing to some random project, it's actually a sanctioned OpenStack managed project. So the demo is going to be, I think, pretty straightforward, but the action out of this is that we're going to ask the board members to run Tempest as a, basically be customer number one, be the alpha users for this. So.
So do we have instructions to give to the board so they can?
Not yet. I think
we hopefully may tomorrow. Let's say we have a branch. We have a branch where it's functionally complete, but the core folks want +2 for stylistic reasons. So
because I can do the board list. 20 out of those 20, 18 and 16 of those 24 won't be the person actually running.
Right, and that's fine.
Right.
What I'm expecting is that I think we're going to need to spend a couple days this week cleaning it up, and probably by the end of the week we'll have a set of instructions that we think it's reliably usable. Yeah. So that'll give them a couple days to find somebody.
Yeah, let's give them the date of where we want them to run it by.
Right, that's a really good idea. Throw down the hammer. Love me some hammer.
So one of the things that we can do in discussion at the board level is actually talk about a date and a deadline for this, because they need to commit resources and have somebody spun up to do it. The other thing that would be cool is if we can generate some test credentials and pass those around, so that not only actually, I like this idea a lot. We should share some test credentials from between the board. We could do it on the we could actually use the confidential list for that, and then have multiple. That way you can test 3 or 4 different clouds, which I think is a part of the test. So we'll scope that out. But I guess an extension of that, before the board does it, I expect people on the DefCore committee to run it and sign off, yes, it worked for me.
And again, not everybody on the community is going to be in a position to do that, but we'd expect at least some of them to.
This is one of those things that's critical to our success, as reaching the community. Otherwise, as usual, I'm concerned that we don't expand out beyond the board and the TC in these decisions, and we really want to do that.
So, path, committee, board, TC, licensees.
What do you mean, licensees?
Yes, licensees. That's why we want the list. I would say board and TC in parallel is probably fine.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason to hold it.
Rob,
Cool.
as an aside, being on Stackforge isn't sufficient for your contributors to be ATCs. You need the TC to make whatever program this lives under an official program.
Oh, thank you for clarifying. That's important. Yeah,
There's a wiki
clear,
page. I'll dump it in the minutes.
yeah, that makes sense. You're right. Thank you for clarifying.
It's cool.
It does address the copyright and trademark issues that we had to from a legal perspective.
I'm sorry, say that last again.
We had some contributors whose companies would not allow them to participate until it was up on Stackforge and in that setting. Particularly, I think Catherine was one from IBM who, they just have some internal policies that until it makes it to Stackforge and sort of gets up there, they can't actually participate in the program, and so it removed that hurdle.
Okay. We covered off on that agenda item?
Probably let's add as a future agenda item, becoming an official program.
David's working that already.
I know.
Well, but yeah, we should keep a track of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, I think David's idea is that it's logically part of OpenStack Infra, and we should just join the Infra program, which means dealing with Monty, which I think is probably fine. We set it up in Stackforge with an eye towards that anyway. So, the biggest issue there is actually what we're doing with TCUP and because right now the Infra team does not run any containers. They use VMs for everything.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
But the way and actually we made some design decisions today that effectively make it, the Docker container is a way to prep the environment, not actually execute the tests. So we run them in the container, but it's really just a way to make it very easy.
It doesn't have to in a container. All right, we're going to talk about designated code. Are we so excited? Come on, Rob, get pumped.
I'm excited. Although I would say, Michael, I didn't see any replies or thread about my comments back to the TC list. Did they make it out?
I don't think I've seen an email. It's possible that I've lost it. Let me have a quick search.
Interesting. Okay. Maybe they didn't make it out.
So it was to the TC list?
Yeah, I sent it to the TC, but I'm not allowed to submit.
Post to the TC.
To post to the TC, so I copied you on it, so you probably read it.
I read it. I was surprised that nobody
commented. I can't see it.
I suspect it got eaten. TC@openstack.org. I didn't send it to the wrong place, did I?
You might have its list at openstack.org.
It's OpenStack TC at lists.openstack.org.
That's why it didn't go anywhere. Okay.
TC@openstack.org is a black hole.
Yes, okay.
No one cares.
Thank goodness. Well, that makes me feel better.
Oh, trust me.
So, Michael, actually, I'd appreciate your feedback, and then I'll reformat it. I'll re-forward it.
Okay, not a problem.
Awesome.
So, actually, if you don't mind summarizing the position, I think that would be...
All right, so first off, the link that was in the agenda was slightly wrong. There was a link to Mark McLaughlin's proposed response. The TC, sometime while I was asleep last night, actually approved a response that we haven't actually sent to you yet, which is the link that is now there. I don't think there's substantial differences between the two, but the wording is different. So if we want to have a conversation about paragraph 3 may not be what you expect it to be.
Okay.
The basic...
So the link that you just linked to also says this resolution is a draft.
Yes.
That's ironic, and I think I'll have to fix it. Probably what I'll do is when I feel like I should email it to DefCore mailing list, and at that point I'll submit a CL that changes this to this reply was on date blah or whatever.
Oh, okay.
So like I said, this only merged last night. So to take a step back from the actual words for a second, the TC tries really hard to be consensus driven, and there is not currently a consensus on how to designate specific portions of code as being core, or in fact if that's even a good idea. And I'm trying really hard here to not kind of advocate my own personal stance and try and represent the stance of the TC, even where I don't 100% agree with it. So what we said was, hey, let's take a step back and work out what we do agree on, because at least that will unblock DefCore at least a bit. And what we do agree on is that there are a bunch of different stakeholders that care about interop and DefCore, but that the most important of those is end users. And luckily, we think, API testing, which you guys have progressed reasonably well, is the right way to do that. And so we'd like to see that attacked first, and then that gives the TC extra time to argue about, how do we designate specific pieces of code, if at all. Does that make sense?
So Rob is going to want to give you a very diplomatic answer, and I'm going to give him a chance to do that after me, because that way he can also apologize for all the rude things that I say to start off with. It is lovely that the TC would like to be in charge of deciding what class of users is the most important for the OpenStack Foundation. However, that's horribly inappropriate. All of the users are inappropriate. Any idea that one class of user or constituent would be more or less important than any other class is the reason that we don't have engineers in charge of this decision. It would be lovely to force rank everything that the board does, and it would guarantee OpenStack's failure. So the highly complicated and nuanced decision that the board came to, including this sort of, yes, we're going to defer doing API-based trademarks to date, and we're going to do this thing that involves compromises around using designated sections as a pseudo GPL licensing scheme, took us a year to get to. So, and actually most of the members of the TC were involved in those debates and discussions with Rob and myself and everyone else for the last 3 years. So, frankly, sounds like you don't like our plan and you don't want to go along with it, which is fine because the board vote actually didn't give the TC the authority. It gave the PTLs the authority, and we were consulting with you as a courtesy. And yes, I agree, it's lovely that you approve of what we're working so hard to do. It is also something that the TC was responsible for doing originally and did nothing on for a very long period of time. So, if you can agree on a way to designate sections, then that's fine. The result of that is there is still a board resolution that says it's based on designated sections, and therefore the designated sections are 0 lines of code, and we can proceed as if it's an Apache 2 licensed code base in its entirety, which will make everyone except for Monty very happy.
The one question I had is,
can I put one little asterisk on that? Actually, we have already designated. They hardwired some of the modules in the bylaw. So the
it's 100% of Swift and 100% of Nova, which was the original problem that created the idea of designated sections. Now,
right,
the real problem here is
their response. What they're recommending is we do API testing and leave the requirement that the entirety of the code is included.
Yes.
That would be 100% designated section,
right.
But I would want that to be explicitly stated by the TC and the PTLs, because
right.
that has a fairly massive impact on the business ability to extend OpenStack.
Right.
Right. So first off, like most of the distros are no longer distros; they're now powered by OpenStack products.
So Michael, am I interpreting that correctly? Because what I'm reading in the response is that you want to do the testing and leave the language that says it's the entirety, which to me is the same thing as saying it's designated as a 100% requirement.
Yeah, I think that's a fair description, right? So what the TC came to was we believe that the initial focus should be on API testing, and whilst API testing is being worked on, the requirement to ship 100% of the code, it's the quote at the very bottom, your distributors include the entirety of OpenStack code from either of the latest 2 releases and associated milestones. That requirement should remain in force until API testing is worked out and people move on to designated sections. I think the reason designated sections is contentious is there's kind of two areas of debate. The first is the TC has trouble coming up with a mechanism that makes sense for how to define lines of code, whilst still allowing people to fix bugs and do refactors and stuff like that. And additionally, there is a subset of the TC that believes that an Apache 2 license was selected, and therefore designating code and saying you can't patch this is a mistake in general.
You can't patch this?
Our understanding of the designated code requirement is that, for example, vendor A can't take a portion of the designated code, then patch on top of it to add their own proprietary secret source and declare themselves to still be OpenStack because they're no longer shipping the code we designated.
That is correct, and the classic example is Neutron, right? The designated section of code in Neutron would be the API layer, and every Neutron driver will be whatever the vendors want to ship. Most vendors will not ship all Neutron drivers, in the same sense that most vendors do not ship all the Cinder drivers. It doesn't, from a vendor standpoint, it does not make sense to do that.
Okay, well, so, look, remember at the beginning I said I'm not necessarily advocating my own stance here, right? I'm trying to represent what the TC has told me, which makes it sometimes difficult, because I'm not necessarily believing the argument I'm making. But as an example there, the Nova PTL, for example, strongly believes that vendors should not be allowed to ship Nova drivers that do not appear in the upstream code base.
Should not be allowed to ship, not required to ship.
Not allowed to ship them and still call themselves OpenStack. I've seen Russell make that argument.
Yes.
A driver not
if I
bundled
sit down and write my own proprietary Nova driver, I should not be allowed to call the thing that I ship OpenStack.
So you need to be careful on the term.
That's actually directly contrasting to the board's resolution, because the board resolution specifically, and this might be the point of contention, said that if there was a designated section like a driver, like a Nova driver, and you pass the tests for the reference driver with your replacement driver, you could still call that OpenStack.
If we stop using the term driver for a second, because in Nova I think people immediately equate this to things like hypervisor drivers.
Yeah.
We use designated section or plugin or module, then we will immediately arrive at the fact that schedulers is something that everybody is replacing, including us and IBM and NTT, and has been since we started OpenStack. We had an alternate scheduler written by NTT before the first release, before Austin. So to say the TC's decision, retroactively erasing all of history, is that no one should have alternate schedulers is bogus. Not to be critical of your clearly stated point of view.
I'm going to pull back for a second and be very, very pragmatic. Try to be pragmatic.
Yeah.
So I think that the TC's position of we can't make a decision, pick all of it, has a certain level of pragmatism to it. In that it doesn't make us overly exposed, right? It's a smaller, from that perspective, it's the smallest possible definition.
It is the largest possible definition.
Well,
it is the largest possible. It is the definition that is most harmful to the commercial ecosystem.
But you're not letting me finish my thought.
Sorry, go ahead.
Because that is where I'm going.
Right.
I think that there are, and this is what I put in that letter I didn't send, that there is an 80-20 rule here, and that for the TC to overlook the low-hanging fruit for designated sections, I think will create community, vendor, and frankly press problems, because there are some things that I would hope that everybody agrees are pretty obvious as options for designated sections, and if we can't just pull those out and take the 80-20 approach.
Again, you're being extremely diplomatic, so I will be slightly less diplomatic.
Okay.
We created OpenStack's foundation with 3 separate bodies, and we did that because of separation of concerns. And we said the technical committee will own technical governance of how OpenStack is built, and the board will own the governance of what OpenStack is, and the user committee will provide advisory roles to both of those bodies.
Yep.
So we spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars and months of my life on the drafting committee doing that. The idea that when the first time we have an interaction between the board and the TC, and the board has said, we have decided what OpenStack is, and we would like you to dovetail that into how it is built, because that is, in theory, what your responsibility is. You're going to come back and tell us you don't like our definition of what OpenStack is, and therefore you are not going to do your part. It says, okay, well, I will go back to what our friend Mark had so much objection to me saying on the last DefCore call, which is, we can't even get a joint session with these guys. Why does the TC exist at all?
The TC exists to a certain extent because we represent the people writing the code, right? I actually think your comment from the YouTube video that was passed around suggesting the entire TC be fired was exceptionally unhelpful, right? This response was written in the context of people feeling that you were out to get them. And perhaps asking people for assistance whilst threatening them is not the smartest way to go.
That's why we're co-chairs.
But to be honest, right, people felt that they were being threatened at the time this response was being written, and that's going to result in a more conservative response. Now,
okay,
right, and I think that's what we're seeing, and that's why my request back is I actually in some ways appreciate the conservative response. I know Josh doesn't, but I think it would be a serious miss to not take the low-hanging fruit out of this, because just identifying the things that I think you guys could easily agree to and move on is will clarify the problem further, right? This has been the whole strategy for DefCore is don't solve all the problems, solve the easy problems, because that discussion leads clarity to the next.
It's going to push it more. I mean, I think it is likely to push it more towards OpenStack compatibility being the only thing that matters. I mean, this whole thing that we've tried to stay away from, which is I just passed the test and I don't care whether I run any of the code or not.
We will. Let's look at an even-handed
which I think would be destructive.
I agree with you, Troy. Let me finish. So I think I want to reinforce this point. I think the risk of taking 100% approach actually pushes us much further towards you pass the API tests, you're good, than anything else.
Absolutely.
And I actually think that it is very destructive to the whole reason that section is in there to say it's all designated code.
Well, no, that's not what they're proposing. They're not because if we used an even-handed argument, said it's all designated code across all projects that have any capabilities that are in core. They're not saying that. They're saying it's just all designated code for Nova and Swift, which is what the bylaws say now because we've punted this argument for 3 years.
Oh, is that what they said?
If we apply this to every other project, and again, I'm using the DefCore definition of any project that has any capabilities that are must-have capabilities, not any project in the integrated release, because I believe there are projects in the integrated release that will have no must-have capabilities. That's what the scoring is indicating so far.
And actually, their response, I think, is, well, the wording of the response isn't clear. The actual, based on what's there, which says leave the language that's in there, I would agree. What they're saying is it's 100% of Nova and Swift. Because that's what the current, if that's
the language is 100%.
And then every other section is not designated?
Exactly. And then no other projects have any designated sections, which means Neutron is free for all.
Where do you read that?
Well,
that's the
what's
reality.
in there is don't change the bylaw. What it says in there currently is don't change the bylaws. I don't know how Joshua's point is that the bylaws say it's 100% of Nova and Swift.
Yeah, and that's it. And there is this assumption that continues to precipitate itself in the TC that the integrated release is somehow connected to core. It is not.
Right.
So
I do think it would, regardless of, it would be nice to get, and this is feedback from it would be nice to get something more specific than what's in the response right now, which is basically says don't change the bylaws. I would, even if your intent by not changing the bylaws is to do a 100% designated code definition, I would prefer to see the TC say we want to designate 100% of, and then if it's Nova and Swift, great. If it's more than that, something else. But that would give us something more clear, because I think we're guessing what the intent of that one paragraph was, and I think the interpretation, if you look at it, is don't change the bylaws. But I'd like to know if that's exactly what TC intended.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah, this is Mark Radcliffe. We've got it exactly in reverse. We should be focusing on how is it that we can make this the best possible project, and the maintaining the bylaws the way they are is a mechanical thing, That shouldn't even be on the list. Well, I guess it should be, maybe it's a tertiary concern.
Well, but I think we're trying to pull a lot of the specificity out of the bylaws regardless. If bylaws change, we're going to probably pull anything that's that specific out. So then the question is, what does the TC really want us to do, as opposed to how to do it, right? They're trying to tell us do it by not changing the bylaws. So what they want is a 100% code requirement as a starting point, then I would rather that be stated explicitly. I look at this a little bit as, this is the reverse of the plug-in argument, where you said, oh, we want plug-ins. And they're like, oh, you're telling us how to do it, not what you want. And I feel like this is saying, this is how you do it. Just don't change the bylaws. It's like, well, what
they're not only telling us
out of it, right?
how to do it, they're telling us what to do, which stakeholders to focus
on.
on.
There is that broader piece of that as well. But
sure.
in this particular case, it's,
Think
in
about all
general, it's unhelpful, but in this particular case, it leaves a lot of ambiguity that I think is hard to figure out what we're even trying to get to.
So here's
hold on.
Yeah.
You've mentioned several times, basically the arrogating to the TC, these users, these use cases are more important. As you pointed out, it doesn't really matter. I think it might be more productive if we focused on the particular question. For example, saying, all right, if you're saying 100%, would you be willing to return and say, could you please be less ambiguous about this and say, are you specifying 100% for Nova and Swift? Even in this case where we've had historical things, is that something you want to think about? Let's instead of focusing on the organizational back and forth,
just focus on the reality of their proposal.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, from IBM's standpoint, if you are now told that you cannot include your alternative scheduler in your product and still call it an OpenStack distro, are you going to convert to using the Powered by OpenStack mark, or are you going to insist that we create an API-compatible mark, and at which point you have no reason at all to contribute any code to any part of OpenStack ever again? I don't think the TC thought this through.
I think
HP is in the same position.
The
exact same position, because today, right?
I agree with your point, but what is the best way when engaging back with the TC to help to get them to think through this? I would suggest maybe let's draft up a series of questions and say, we appreciate this response. Could you?
Well, I think that's
maybe I should just read aloud the response I wrote.
No, that's fine. I mean, you can just send it out. We can look at it later. But,
I mean, I was on the TC and failed to make any progress on this issue 3 years ago, which is why I'm obviously a little over frustrated and I have no patience left for this. So I would love to leave the official response to Rob to say, maybe we should figure out how to get these guys to go along with maybe thinking through the consequences of their decision, and their decision that end users matter most, and so the people paying for their salaries and the vast majority of development that goes on OpenStack, those guys in interest don't matter at all. Thinking through that before this sort of bullshit might be helpful.
So here's the thing, Josh.
But I think we need to go back to the core, which is, what does the technical committee believe is the correct approach of defining what OpenStack is? Starting with the idea is we don't want to change the bylaws.
No, Mark.
I'm going to cut you off, Mark, on that one.
Totally irrelevant. It's not their responsibility. It's already the responsibility of the board that is designated to this body, and we've already done the work.
And we've done it in a very inclusive, open way, in which many people on the TC were included in this process.
Right.
And so, right, the principles that we're using to guide this, I think, are consensus positions.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to open that can of worms. I think that.
Okay.
So here's the thing. This response is written like this because when the TC sat down and discussed this, there is, for example, a camp that honestly feels that if it's not in upstream OpenStack, it shouldn't be shipped, right? I'm not saying that's
Yeah.
all of the TC, but there is a vocal portion of the TC who believes that and will decline to be involved in any other solution. There's another part of the TC that, for example, is worried about companies like Red Hat and the fact that they want to support OpenStack releases for a lot longer than OpenStack does. And so, they want to be able to backport things because their customers demand it of them. But yeah, if they backport, say, a feature from, I don't know, Grizzly to Folsom, are they still allowed to call that OpenStack? Because it changes a lot of the code or it could potentially change a lot of the code that we have said is designated. So,
So there's actual specific language in the board resolution about designated sections that deals specifically with this, around the concerns of backporting and around the concerns of.
And Michael was the author of them.
I know, so that's the thing that's a little confusing there. It's like,
well, Michael, he's doing a very good job
Yes.
representing the TC's position. Michael, thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
So, Josh, remember when I said I don't necessarily agree with everything that I am trying to represent here. I am not all of the TC. I am trying to come, and this is part of the problem, right? The TC doesn't have a single stance on this issue, so sometimes the things I feel I have to say in order to accurately represent what TC members say are mutually conflicting.
Right.
Right, but it does sound like the closest thing to the official stance of the TC is that we should leave the language as it is, which is you have to run all of OpenStack, Swift, and Nova. I did finally find the relevant pieces that state that. That is what it says. You have to run the entirety of OpenStack Compute, Nova, and the entirety of OpenStack Object Storage, Swift.
Yeah,
But you can replace that. You can replace everything else, including Keystone, which is the thing that provides discoverability of every other feature.
That language, you have a problem with backporting.
Well, no, I mean, there's lots of things, but basically it says that you should do that with either of the latest code from either of the last two releases, associated milestones upon its launch. So basically, what it's saying is that is their current stance on the starting point for required code.
Yeah. What this is saying is that this is the current lowest common denominator response. This was the largest amount of agreement that could be extracted from the TC on this issue in a reasonable amount of time. This took 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I guess we'll do that through the feedback mechanism from Rob, which is I think this committee has grave concerns that creates a very problematic situation.
So here's the thing we can do that I think is the thing that we actually did originally. Here's the original thing that we did. The designated section, when we defined it, was intended to be designated by the PTL and not the TC. And I think the appropriate action to take at this point is to say, look, we already have a board resolution that requires the designated sections. We already have a board resolution that says projects must have an open reference implementation. This expects that projects are expected to implement a plugin or extension architecture. That is in the board resolution. That is the decision of the OpenStack Foundation to date on core. What we can do is say, PTLs, now one at a time, we don't really care about the TC. It's nice that you wanted to tell us how to do our job. We're going to continue with our process as defined, and we can go to each PTL and say, how would you like to designate sections in your project? Here are, as far as we can tell, the potential range of ramifications at the extremes of 100% and 0%.
I guess
both of them having negative consequences.
At least have a dialogue with the TC before we decide to say we don't care about the TC.
Well, the problem we have is
I understand your frustration.
the number one issue there is Swift, and John Dickinson is the PTL of Swift and not on the TC, and has no representation in this conversation. And that is not going to be resolved by chatting with the TC about it.
But that's not the number one issue. Nothing I've heard says that John's issue is the number one issue.
Okay.
I'm actually a little bit confused about what the number one issue is.
Well, I think the number one issue is that there's two sides at a minimum. The TC can't come to consensus, so the lack of consensus says don't change anything, which unfortunately isn't going to be very helpful.
So, but here's.
Michael, I shouldn't speak for Michael, but that's
I have trouble with that interpretation, because everything I've learned and seen about OpenStack for the entire length of the whole project is that there have been and have always been sections of the code that are designed to be replaced. Scheduler is a classic example. The whole design of Neutron is by design pluggable. And so I find it very troubling that the TC, rather than just sit down and say, well, okay, Neutron is pretty clear, got it, and go through the things where project by project they can hit consensus on, instead of doing that, to come back and just throw up a smokescreen on the whole question by just elevating it out of the projects and the code. I believe that you are not taking on the actual requested task. I understand there isn't consensus with this. The way you're approaching it is ultimately not going to shed a positive light on OpenStack, because by TC's own statements, by members of the TC's own statements, there are plugins and modules and components, because that's how we ended up with designated sections. And so this easy out is, I really think, going to backfire.
And maybe the answer is, frankly, that you're not going to get consensus, and the majority has to make a decision.
Right.
Yeah. Or the board would have to make it for the TC.
Well,
because that ultimately is one of our responsibilities.
So actually, I'm going to totally recant everything I said previously.
Good.
I think this is the ideal outcome from the TC. I think we will accept their decision and move forward. The designated sections are 100% of Nova and 100% of Swift. There is no requirement that everything you ship is in Nova and Swift. You can add on beyond 100% of Nova and 100% of Swift.
Yeah.
You just have to ship it. And there is 0% designated code and everything else, which I think is a big problem going forward. But I think we can go ahead and let that problem manifest and have entire parts of it. Because where that problem is going to manifest is in parts of OpenStack that are already pretty fucked up.
Okay, so that is a workable position. Do you want somebody else to reiterate it so that we have another way to say it?
Yeah.
I'll take a stab at it unless somebody else wants to.
I mean, Michael could take it.
Michael, do you want to try and reiterate what Josh just said?
So my take on what Josh just said is that the DefCore committee proposes to take the TC response and run with it. And so that means 100% of Nova and 100% of Swift and 0% of everything else. But Josh's definition of 100% allows for, say, for example, Nova to be tweaked by vendors when they ship it, which I'm not sure is not my interpretation of 100%. So if, for example,
it does comply with the way the DefCore principles are written. Basically, the DefCore says that if you ship the required code and you pass the tests, you have met the criteria, and it is allowable to add additional things on. That is actually the way that principle.
The reason the DefCore committee drafted something saying, you know this, Michael, we wrote designated section because the TC did not want us telling them how to do their job. They didn't want us saying plugin or saying extension or saying anything that sounded like an implementation detail. And there was 6 months of fighting about the word plugin. So you didn't want us to tell you how to do your job. So we're saying, fine, don't tell us how to do ours. We will take your feedback, which is we're not going to define designated sections. We're going to tell you how to do your job on running the definition of core instead, and tell you who the stakeholders are and who they matter. And we'll run with it. I don't think it's the best for OpenStack. I don't think it's actually a responsible response from the TC. But I'm happy to run with it, because it means I don't have to talk about it anymore.
Are we thinking about...
Guys, excuse me, just before we go forward, there's been a number of discussions of what are the core, the modules that are in core right now. So the ones that are in the bylaws, and I don't know if they map to what you're talking about, but they're called block storage, compute, dashboard, identity service, image service, networking, object storage. That is what is currently defined as being core. But Mark, that is a different section of the bylaws than where it says what source code is required to be shipped, which only names Nova and Swift. Well, no, actually, this
in the trademark.
No, the trademark. This section supersedes. This is the section where it defines what core OpenStack project is. Okay. And so this is, section 4.1b. So, so if you think that I don't think the trademark policy trumps here. This is a section that says you have to have these modules, as well as, library project, gating projects, and supporting projects. Core OpenStack project means the soft module, which are part of an integrated release in which an OpenStack trademark may be used. And then it goes on to say what the core OpenStack project modules are.
Yeah, the difference is where trademark may be used versus what because the issue we're talking about is only applied to the OpenStack distribution trademark license, which requires specifically Swift and Nova.
Well, it sounds to me like they may not have been joined up then.
Yeah, they were never joined up. I'm reading from 2.I in sorry, this is built for OpenStack, which include the entirety of the OpenStack compute code from either of the two latest releases.
Yeah.
There's a separate one under the OpenStack distribution one. But regardless, each of the marks have explicit details on what must be shipped, which is what we were trying to fix.
Right. Yeah.
So,
so just as a matter of context, I was told that the license and the trademark policy were fine and not even to look at them. So that's why we may have a mismatch here. So
yeah, there is a mismatch. Yeah, there has been for a while.
So I'd like to close this discussion with this as an action item. I don't think we're ready to jump on that definition just yet. But I do think that you and I need to draft a resolution back to the TC and get on the agenda, basically explaining the position of how we will interpret the current resolution, which is these codes are required, nothing else is required. Pass the tests, ship what you want, and let the TC see if the implications of that interpretation prompt a new consensus. Because
I wonder, maybe we're too far down this path to even bring this up, but I guess what occurs to me is that what I heard you sort of say is that there are obvious places where we allow substitution today, right, where the code is actually architected to allow alternate implementations to be included. And I guess wondering if it changes, and this is more of a question for Michael than anything, but does it change how we think about it if what we're defining is places where alternate implementations are allowed versus this defining required code? Because I've heard a lot of discussion about, well, how are we sure that the required code is included? Are we using SHA-1 signatures and to make sure there's no modifications, and like a whole bunch of sort of technical details around the details of the definition of how you validate required code versus define it. And I guess in some ways I'm wondering, could we simplify the problem by saying, no, let's focus on actually defining places where substitution or alternate implementation is allowed, such as we know, maybe hypervisor driver, maybe
that's where it's clarified.
Here's one other thing.
There's a clarification on this that I want to make, and we need to make. I think I made it in my letter. We are not trying to create a police state.
Yeah.
This is an honor system thing. Designated sections of code is functionally an honor system designation. There is no need.
We were clear on that when we met with the TC.
I know, and I'm
May have been,
reiterating.
but
I'm reiterating.
The conversation seems to have gotten into the details of validating.
Correct. Our
getting
goal
very
is
specific about how to validate.
we are not trying to create an enforcement mechanism. We're trying to provide guidance for implementers.
Well, Rob, just be clear, it's not a police state, but if we don't ensure that there's a consistent use of the mark is no longer going to be enforceable.
And that is exactly why we asked for designated sections. I believe that if you got away from saying, I need to control which line numbers of code it was, and you said, here's the API or here's the designated section, there would be sufficient technical clarity for people to understand this and implement it. I do not think the vendors implementing OpenStack have any desire to cheat or bypass this rule if they have clear guidance, just the opposite. And so
I also think it would be easy to add some language, like plus or minus 1,000 lines. Jesus Christ.
Fair use.
Like, come on,
100%.
okay, yeah, so I tweaked 20
Refactored
lines
this to get a little bit
in
of
this
an
thing,
optimization.
just to make it easier to have a callback. I want a callback function, so I added a bunch of decorators. Oh my God, nobody's gonna kill you, right? Like, the reality is, I was just looking back at the board resolution. There is no mention of the TC, or the PTLs, or the technical committee in any of the resolutions that the board passed. There is no responsibility for this committee or the board to consult with the TC on defining designated sections.
That's correct.
It was a courtesy. It was kind of a reasonable separation of church and state to say, we won't tell you how to do your job. But if you don't want to do your job, we will go ahead and do it. And I think, again, we could do it at the higher level concept of, these are the modules, these are the components. We don't have to use line numbers, we don't have to use SHA-1 hashes, and we don't have to worry that much about the implementation details. Say, the intent is, Nova is described as 7 different components. There's conductor, and there's API, and there's scheduler, and there's a hypervisor driver, and blah, blah, blah. We intend that the scheduler and the conductor and the driver can be replaced, and that the API is a designated section. That doesn't seem so hard.
That doesn't,
It doesn't.
So there's a bunch of stuff there, right? So to go back to Troy's original question, I actually think that having an opt-out model, like effectively saying these are the points where we think you can extend or modify, would be easier to get the TC to agree on, just because it's mechanically easier, right? We don't have to work out how do you express, some bits of Nova API but not others, right? Whereas if you just said, look, we expect people to, extend, say, hypervisor drivers and schedulers, but not Nova API, then that is certainly easier.
Except via the extension framework, which already exists.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to use the word extension because, oh my God, I don't want to have a conversation about whether or not plugins are a good idea. But I should warn you, the TC is in fact just discussing whether or not plugins are a good idea. Not as something they're doing in their meetings, but people over beer are saying, oh, I'm not sure plugins are a good idea. So that's not necessarily something that will never come up again. I think the other thing is, I understand that Josh has been living this for 19 years and clearly needs some form of stress leave. But a bunch of the TC weren't there 6 or 12 months ago when this stuff was originally being discussed. They don't have the context that you guys have. So I don't think it's fair to be surprised when they turn around and say we're confused about the motivation for this bit over here when they, weren't necessarily around. I think it's actually also good that we're having this debate, right? It shows that people care. If no one gave a shit, then we would just say, oh, look, do something random, we're just going to keep on keeping on. So I think being frustrated that people care is not necessarily the best plan ever.
No,
What I'm frustrated by is that we have had a legal obligation to have a joint session between the TC and the board on this topic for years. And we have never done it. And there has been a different excuse from the TC for why we haven't done it every single time. And I know people are tired of me harping about this, and I was equally judgmental, by the way, of the Rackspace staff when I was on the TC, and we perceived Rackspace to be the problem around the definition of core. And then I was harshly critical of the Foundation drafting committee for derailing our attempts to do this inside FITS. So it's not that I have particular ire for the TC's role in this. I have particular ire for people who want to tell us to slow down and go backwards every time we're trying to make progress because they don't want to do the hard work. It is always going to be hard work. It is always going to be contentious. It is always going to involve making mistakes. But right now, we are at the worst possible situation where we have no clear guidance for the larger community of what's going to be in or out of OpenStack in the next release, and the TC is now going to decide to roll back plugins.
Okay, so Josh.
So, I know. I need to calm down.
We've got a joint TC board session the day before the May summit. Do you think
I know, I'm so excited.
Well, but except by your definition of what that joint meeting is for, it's probably off the rails too, right? Because there's this Etherpad with a list of 47 things to discuss, and we're going to get like 3 of them done. And if DefCore ain't in those 3, it's not going to meet your needs, right? So, I know the board has this on their agenda for tomorrow, but maybe we need to clarify exactly what the purpose of this joint TC board session is, if it's not just a general kind of hug and kiss. And if it's too far away, then should we just have a mid-cycle meetup where we try to get the TC and the DefCore people into a room? I think these issues would be massively easier to solve if we just locked everyone in a room and told them they're not allowed out until they reach a consensus.
I would very much appreciate an interactive meeting with the TC and the DefCore. I appreciate you making that suggestion, and will happily accept that invitation.
So, but bearing in mind that the TC doesn't have any budget or history of having physical meetings ever, except maybe we had dinner once, kind of thing.
I don't think we need a physical meeting. I do think a voice meeting would be much more productive on these topics than an IRC meeting.
But the reason I'm hesitant to do a voice meeting is because I think it's going to be a very long meeting. I think you're not going to get TC all pulling in the same direction on this issue after an hour or even 2 hours. This is like a full day. No,
well, this would be great. This would be great training for anybody on the TC who thinks they want to be on the board, because that's how all of our board meetings are.
And we could do it. We could say, here's the time limit. If we don't finish, we're meeting again in another week at the exact same time.
Yeah, you can break it down.
And you just keep going until it's finished.
I will say, Alan and I confronted this exact problem. The spider was the result of that, and what we did was we decomposed, we carefully controlled the agenda to talk about the issues that we felt like we had consensus on and that we had to address. And Michael, if you would like to work one-on-one with me to try and craft an agenda that discusses the items that we can discuss first and then drills it through, I'm actually very confident that we could get through this without it being a circular 8-hour meeting, but it would just take some setup.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of what the TC response was trying to get at, was let's sneak up on this. If you ask for a big bang, list everything everywhere that, vendors must not tweak and must ship, that's really hard. Whereas if you say, can we all agree that the API implementations for each of the, integrated projects are designated? Then people will probably say yes. And then you can, progressively move that line over time.
Yeah, and I think that's what our whole idea around this has been, is that can we find the easy, low-hanging fruit, say that's designated, and then start worrying about the line, later. I think there, as you can tell, there's sort of unified concern that keeping the line where it is now, which is essentially undefined. I guess to some level all of NOVA and SWIFT is defined, but I don't think it's a useful definition, is not helpful. And I think the fundamental problem is, unfortunately, we are way behind. It'd be great if we were 2 years ago at this point in the process and we had the time to go much slower. But the reality of the situation is honestly, the only thing the foundation has is its trademark and its brand. And if we don't find a way to put something close to a useful discussion, a useful definition of this and process in this, between now and Paris, that's enforceable and usable by this, I'm afraid the risk continues to go that it just completely gets away from us and the brand will be useless. And I think that, I don't know if the TC recognizes that sense of urgency or the overall state of where we are and why this matters from that perspective, but it is, if you have any context in this, and I have much less than Josh, you can't help but notice that we are way behind getting some useful, meaningful definition of the brand. And honestly, right now there's very little from preventing anybody from just taking all the code and going and doing something else with it and starting up their own brand and calling it something else and completely devaluing all of OpenStack. And I don't think anybody's in a position to go do that right now. There's certainly nothing that prevents them from doing that.
Sorry, there's at least one vendor that's done that I'm aware of.
Yeah, well, a few more do it.
They don't call their product OpenStack, but they take Nova at least, and they use it for their own purposes.
And so if that gets away from us over the next 12 months.
Do that, right? So right. We when we started the project, we accepted that this was a thing that we would not object to.
No, I don't want to stop that, but the point is that could become more valuable than the brand. I mean, it could, if it gets to the point where it's happening so often because there's no value in OpenStack, then everything we built around the brand OpenStack could just disappear, right? I mean, it could just vaporize, and I think that's the concern, is that if we don't act to do something that makes it a meaningful, useful definition around what it is to run OpenStack or not, then everybody will just say, well, look, I ran the test, I can prove I'm compatible, and nothing else matters, and it all gets away from us.
All right, I'm going to time check this. Sorry. I think we actually have made some progress. We have an option that we think we can work with if we have to. We have an invitation for a meeting, which I think will help resolve a lot of these issues. And
I'd like to.
Well,
yeah.
Look, I stayed up till nearly noon, so I feel like I should just get one more sentence in.
Sure.
Which is,
Well,
so what is stopping the DefCore committee from taking the TC's response and saying, you're right, we agree that APIs are in fact definitely designated sections, so we're going to designate all of the APIs for all of the integrated projects, and then come back later and say, okay, what other bits should we designate? Because that gives you the API testing you're doing now and some concrete code that isn't in Nova and Swift to say, these bits are definitely important.
I don't think there's anything that would prevent, well, that's the nicer way of describing what I think Josh proposed, which was to say, okay, if you guys aren't going to give us a better definition of required code, we'll just define it. And we could just define it to be just the API or something like that. So there's nothing stopping us from doing that other than I think we feel like the TC should be in a better position to make that statement than the board. But if the TC, if what the TC is saying is, look, we don't know how and we're not ready and we can't do it in the way that we can agree to, that is absolutely within the power of the board to make that designation, because the current board resolutions don't require that this comes from the TC.
Yeah. Well, and look, I think, like I said, I think there's mechanical concerns, right? I should probably clarify my statement as any API that is public and versioned. So the problem with, say, the Nova hypervisor driver layer, for instance, is we don't version it. If you have an out-of-tree driver, we might randomly break it because we don't even know it exists, and we don't test against it, and we don't have a stable API. So
wait, that's not accurate, because FITS is actually part of the definition that we're looking to enforce. We didn't expect to do designated sections without test coverage. Those go hand in hand. So I actually want to be careful that we don't say that. Right.
I think I can think of ways to break Nova where your Tempest tests will still pass by changing the hypervisor driver layer. I think
no doubt
that's totally true, and I don't think there's any. Once again, we're all on the same side. So the vendors want this stuff to work. They want their drivers to work. They want tests. They will add tests to make sure that they catch things. We're trying to create a virtuous cycle.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, the problem with Tempest tests is they test APIs, but if Nova has some internal operation that isn't working because, the driver has drifted compared to the interface that we've implemented, you won't necessarily see that via an API. Things will just be subtly broken on the inside and fall over after 6 weeks of running or something.
I agree with you, and that's actually why we didn't stipulate Tempest in the principles. The principles were actually designed to be able to be more thorough, white box or black box, and I remember you were part of these conversations too, in the future, if we felt like it was necessary to ensure that. And actually the next topic of this meeting is exactly the white box testing question.
And but I would also say it's not the purpose of DefCore to ensure a quality level of implementation of the code, right? Like, we're not trying to say, oh, you've done a high quality, high scalable implementation of OpenStack. We're just saying you pass some minimum criteria that allows some level of interoperability or programmability of your system. So there's nothing about DefCore that would ever detect what you talked about, which is some subtle way that might cause breakage in this thing months down the road, which is really more of a quality statement than a compatibility statement.
Well, it could as the test coverage.
Well, it's
grows,
not.
Right? This is why I say virtuous cycle.
Yeah, but I do think I mean, over time, I think we'll go beyond API testing to some of the scenario tests, to some of the, sort of, did I get the VM I wanted out of this versus just knowing I got a VM up? I mean, I think that will expand. We're limited to what's there right now, which is sort of what we have in Tempest.
So that's an interesting comment, because I think part of the problem is the TC does think about DefCore as being a quality problem, right? In the sense of what you're trying to say with the OpenStack trademark is this is OpenStack, and OpenStack is of high quality, and therefore this branding has value. So if we're not somehow ensuring that, somebody's out of tree driver or plugin or whatever is not terrible, then we're losing the...
Michael, the first time we started FITS, I tried to put quality benchmarks into the testing suite, and it derailed the entire process. So this cycle, we explicitly deferred any testing of quality, and we've stuck only with testing of interrupt-based compatibility.
And I should also say I probably overstated to say DefCore will never. It is certainly not the focus of this initial DefCore release to get into the degree of quality that you sort of outlined. I mean, it's a basic quality test of it works the way I expect. If I write code and I hit this endpoint, it's going to do what I expect at a fairly basic level. It's not going to go. And I admit we should get to a much higher standard than that, but I think we'd all be happy to start with something.
So I just wrote
a compatibility test.
And I'm back, and I really do want to close this topic so we have a little bit of time. I'll keep going back to this. The function of this work is to create a virtuous cycle that encourages people to write more tests and creates an opportunity for us to solve these problems in the future. And so it's easy to try and put too much into what we're doing right now. We're trying to create the basis and then a baseline.
Well, and then as we find holes, the community comes together to close the gaps, and improve the breadth over time.
And Alan, you wanted the last word on this.
Well, not necessarily the last word, but so I've just been sitting here thinking, instead of having an all-day clash with TC, could we break it down again? Could we maybe pick a particular module, work with that PTO, and work through it, then sit with the TC and say, okay, we worked through a module. Working with that PTO, we were able to figure out what defined areas of code or whatever. We made it work. We can do it if we have to go through every module with each PTO one by one.
That's exactly what, and Josh actually just started doing something.
I just finished, actually. I just wrote designated sections for all of the core modules in less time than we spent arguing about the process to apply to it. Like, at a level of granularity that I think we could take into trademark policy and say, okay, it's not SHA-1 hashes, it's just these are the components.
Well, why don't we put that back in your response and say, this is sort of what we had in mind, why can't we get to this? I mean,
all right, so I'm going to make this officially part of the next agenda.
All right.
I mean, it's now part of public record, so there's not much. I don't want to dive into it. The TC is going to digest what you wrote back. We need to craft a response. Michael, please help us get an interactive meeting so that we can discuss this. And you and I, or whoever wants, can start chipping away at this, probably using what Josh did as a starting point. I think this is very solvable.
Do you think the pre-summit session is too far away? Do you think we need to have that interactive session before then?
Yes, strongly. I really believe that the pre-summit session should be it should be a short discussion on it to make sure that everybody's aligned, and then move forward. We really, the whole purpose of subcommittees is to get these positions out, get them resolved, and move forward. Otherwise, the meetings are not functional.
There's too many people in that room.
Yeah. No, it's
going to be 40 people in that room.
So I think if we do it progressively over the next couple of weeks, nobody will be taken by surprise, and it'll be like we try to make all this stuff, interesting, but no fireworks, because we've heard people's issues off big meeting topics. All right, I'm going to move on to fireworks.
Michael, I should just apologize for yelling constantly about this issue. I don't have any personal problem with anybody on the TC, and I do have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that all of you do. So it's just been a long time of being frustrated about trying to move the same ball forward. Yeah. This is why I try and make Rob in charge of actually interacting with other humans.
Josh, I think that's fair. I think, to be honest, part of the problem is the TC has been focusing on many other things, like incubating 700 projects. And so we're kind of confused by what you're asking for because we don't have the background. And that's why I think an interactive session might help.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, we should move on, though. Yeah.
Please.
Fireworks, drivers.
So the backdrop of this is just that Mirantis is trying to jumpstart the process of driver testing, and they made announcements about it. They're trying to move forward. They're not the only effort testing that certification testing effort in place. This is expected. The press perceives it as conflicting or not aligned with the work that we're doing. I know it's a board topic because we have it on the agenda specifically to talk about. Rather than a lot of preamble, does people want to freeform a little bit? I'd ask you to keep your remarks short. Rocky, go ahead. Yeah, please.
I think since there are all these efforts starting, I think we, as the supposed designated program for a lot of this stuff, should reach out to these other nation projects and try and get on the same page and see if there is commonality which could actually speed up the whole process of getting RefStack in a usable state. We might make it, we won't make it for Ice Coast, but we might have something extremely solid by Paris if we can take advantage of these other folks who also have a fire in their belly to make it happen.
So you made an assumption which I wasn't necessarily making, which is that their efforts were parallel to what we're doing with RefStack.
Not necessarily parallel, but they're all frustrated by having things that are broken and no way to tell whether they're broken or...
They is in RefStack?
There's a project, there's an
Rally.
effort to test all the drivers.
No, I understand
in
more.
Belgium.
You just said they, and I was trying to figure out, you said they are frustrated, I was trying to figure out who they is.
There's, one of the biggest ones is Barantis.
Okay.
But they've proposed the driver test, as have a number of other people. I think it's a Russell Bryan.
Yeah, Stack,
And,
not the RefStack group.
yeah,
Those of it interested in the driver test.
Yeah, some Neutron folks who are frustrated with the quality of Neutron.
Yeah.
Some folks who are wondering about the quality of hypervisors and libvirt and other things in
So
Nova.
is this a blocking issue for RefStack to be successful?
No.
No.
So there's two things. One is it feels like a waste to have other people working on methods of running Tempest. And so we've had a number of folks come out of the woodwork since we published that we were working on it in RefStack saying, oh man, we were already writing that. We should have collaborated, including DreamHost, Rotate, GUI, Tempest Runner,
IBM.
Dell, IBM. So that's a common coordination problem in OpenStack of, there's a lot of people writing the same code. How do we keep track of that? How do we go find if there is one already? What we were doing for RefStack, I think most of the work was not actually a GUI for running Tempest. Most of the work was architectural and how do we crowdsource data about different test environments and how do we deal with the mapping to capabilities, which nobody else was doing. So that seems relevant. And then what Mirantis is pushing as far as driver certification is also very disjoint or totally separate of like certifying drivers is specifically the thing we're not doing in RefStack. We're dealing with core as opposed to plugins. Although,
Correct.
if the plugins are behind a core API, then.
Well, so I think that,
But
I didn't understand your comment.
So part of it is
You only said
that
one
with these
problem.
neutron drivers and other drivers, if the APIs are not well tested, well, their efforts could actually bring out holes in the APIs and make them better tested. But if they're not well defined and they're not well tested, then some of these other efforts are going to really make it obvious that there is some crappy code in parts of the project.
which is a win for us.
Yeah,
I mean,
but,
I was waiting to
but
hear
there's-
that because.
well, yeah, no, that's really good. But
Okay.
the thing is why have 6 teams that all have 1 or 2 people working on almost the exact same thing with a different focus, whereas you could,
Yeah, I think it's more about the confusion it provides outside of OpenStack when you've got, 14 different certification programs, Oh, this one's doing driver, and this one's doing core, and this one's doing, this, and they're all done and sort of messaged in a different way by different companies with different
Right.
interests, and then everybody kind of goes, wow, OpenStack's a mess, there's 10 different ways to certify, and everybody's doing it differently, they can't get their act together.
consistency of message and architectures.
and I do have an issue if the Mirantis's test certification stuff is done and only Mirantis can run it.
Sure.
The conversation I had with Boris when he was talking about this was everything we're doing is upstreamed. Now, that's a very broad answer, but if we, it's our job it's always our job in this problem in 100 different ways to make sure that things are upstreamed in ways that multiple people pick them up. But we're exposing the fact that test coverage is woeful. Drivers are actually a really good example of a place where there's tremendous gaps, and so.
Even APIs.
And APIs, and so if this accelerates test development, it seems like a positive thing.
So, I know you're gonna hate me for saying this.
Okay.
I'm just gonna preface it by saying, the root of the problem that we're talking about here is actually the programs versus projects debate that we've been having. Because, let me point this out. There is media value in starting a new thing, and there's no media value in contributing to an existing thing that it is already perceived somebody else is the leader of. And we saw this with Stackalytics. The launch of Stackalytics was, dude, we just finished building the status for the activity.openstack.org status board. And Mirantis launched Stackalytics instead of contributing to that. And there was a bunch of argument as, is it open source or not? Do you really want to bother talking to Stefano about how would you collaborate on that? Launching something new where you own the brand is an easier way to do it.
Yeah.
This is exactly the same behavior because there is no enforcement of program collaboration inside OpenStack. There's no requirement to go and join an existing program. There's no pushback when people launch new things to say, that should actually probably be part of something we already have. And the history of OpenStack going all the way back to Glance is it's easier to start a new project than it is to contribute new functionality to an existing project, and it's a better story.
Which is why the CC has 700 projects all coming at them.
So, and this is the same thing with the creation of Neutron. It's a lot easier to have a new, and I mean, not to harp on this, the Neutron kickoff meeting explicitly did not invite either myself or Bish. And we wrote Nova Network, and we asked to be invited, and they said we weren't welcome because we weren't network people. So the history in OpenStack is take a new team, start a new thing. And that's the biggest messaging problem we have with the press is people say, it's just a free-for-all of a bunch of vendors doing their own stuff. That's actually true. So talking about it in the context of and the OpenStack Foundation did a great job of corralling this around training. Because we said, look, we're not going to let anyone use the mark. We're not going to let people go out and say, these are OpenStack certified drivers. That's a clear violation of our existing trademark policy. We did it around training. We said, you're going to join the training program. It's going to be on the OpenStack.org website. We're going to look at what is the minimum criteria of what people are getting trained to use. How are we going to audit that? Limited set of partners for a first launch, and we did a great job of that. And as soon as the foundation took a position on it, all the vendors, including us and Mirantis, got in line.
Yeah.
We said, okay, we'll come and we'll make our training part of the OpenStack training program. We have to do the same thing around some of these other trademark issues because people are just running roughshod over the trademark all the time.
Okay,
Josh?
Yeah.
Have you seen the recent TC resolution about this? I'm just trying to find it, but not immediately succeeding. Basically, the TC has recently added a requirement. I'm pretty sure it's been passed and is merged and all of that. That says that if you're starting a new project and you seek incubation, and that project is attempting to replace the functionality of an existing project, then it must completely replace the functionality of that existing project, and the existing project must go away. So this is all.
Yeah.
This has been added as a criteria for, effectively for graduation to integrated, right?
I know, we saw this, I saw this, and it's horribly worrisome, because I think it's frankly exactly the opposite of what I was just suggesting. What we were suggesting, and Rob and I have debated this endlessly inside DefCore, and we've talked to some of the TC members about it. The goal is not to crush the opportunity to have parallel implementations or parallel projects that serve the same purpose. Because there's a lot of projects where we need that kind of relationship where there's no clear single path yet. The goal is to collate those things into standard programs so there's less confusion for the user community as to what's actually going on and which one's official and which one's not. And to make them, yeah.
I was just going to say, look, where the TC was coming from was specifically the Neutron case. We were not excited by having this very, very long process where you haven't completely replaced Nova Network yet. And so the proposed solution was to not let something be integrated until it's actually finished the job it's set out to attempt.
Yes, and I actually really appreciate that, and I think it is the right step, but I think we need to just be careful around the messaging in incubation to integration. One of the things we've debated endlessly in DefCore is whether we actually need clearer tracks for projects or programs that will never be part of core. In other words, legitimately part of OpenStack, but probably not ever going to be a must-have capability, and that's fine. And it may be that these are alternate implementations of a whole bunch of different things that are parallel.
Which we touched on a little bit in INCUP.
We did touch on an INCUP, yeah. And but we did. This is why I put nomenclature on here as one of the outcomes of the DefCore, is that we really have to work on the words we use to describe all the various parts of this set of moving pieces.
In INCUP we did put down the word, but nobody's using them correctly. So we did state them, we did write them down, but we're not consistent in
how they get applied.
People aren't applying them correctly.
Anyway, I didn't mean to derail from the broader conversation.
This is exactly the conversation I want to have. So, based on what I'm hearing, I think that there is a real concern that these efforts are not collaborative efforts, that they are potentially parallel efforts, that we actually need to take action to align. Because I will say, right, Miranta's never asked to be on the DefCore agenda and be part of this conversation.
Or join the committee, although Boris is on the board. I mean,
they did ask to be on the board either just before or after they actually made the big announcement. Like, had Boris come to the board and said, this is a topic I want us to talk about how we're going to do certification, and we'd have had a thing about it, but instead it's kind of like, because I remember him sending out saying, oh, I'd like to do this on the agenda. It was like a day or two before, then they announced, hey, by the way, we're going to do this.
Yeah, and there are projects that springboard off of that, such as Rally. And being pretty new to OpenStack and being from a quality and system perspective, I'm a systems engineer. What I see is that as OpenStack gets bigger, they're managing to deal with their continuous integration, continuous deployment, but the consistency is starting to really shred across projects and more so between programs than projects. And without that consistency, OpenStack will never feel like a real program, because, well, you do it this way over here, and you do it this other way over here, and the APIs are set up in this way here, but you have to use this other way, camel case versus underscore, all sorts of things. And what I'm seeing is just this, part of the dissipation is that there are there are standards beyond just coding standards that need to be developed and disseminated to keep OpenStack from just flying apart at the seams.
I mean, again, we come back to the fact that the
No.
only tool we have, the blunt instrument, is the trademark. The only way the trademark is preserved in value is if we are absolutely ruthless in the application of the trademark. In cases where people make announcements saying this is OpenStack certified X, before it is a ratified decision of the board, I'm sorry. I got a cease and desist letter from the foundation last month, and I was so excited. I was like, you guys are finally paying attention. Thank you. Right? And it turned out I already had the license for the use of the mark we were doing, but they're like, you can't change your product name without refiling your form. We're like, okay, I'll refile the form. But like anytime I see that, I was like, did we have it? This is why I've asked, as part of the finance committee and as a board member, to have a report on the stats on our cease and desist and the trademark policy and how it is being applied for every board meeting, and I've yet to ever see it. And I know it's because the foundation staff are not tracking it. It's something being done by lawyers, and it is the most important activity of the staff. That said, I think it has to be an action of the board as well. It's not just that we leave this to the foundation staff. It has to be. There is a process for debate on the mailing list around technical issues, and that's perfectly appropriate. Any idea that somebody has that they want to throw up, put it in the mailing list. That's how you have technical conversations. But if you're going to propose something that is around the trademark or a certification program, that has to go to the board first, not a media.
Yeah.
So I actually think that turns into a action item out of this. I think we actually have a statement that says announcements related to test coverage are board and brand activities.
I don't know about that. No, I don't think it's about test coverage. I think it's about the use of the mark, because that is the only thing the board really controls.
It's referring to. I have to go back and look at it, but yeah. It's
Well, he was making a stronger statement.
Right, which I think is a dangerous statement to make, because we don't want to be seen to be having a chilling effect on a discussion of code quality.
No, but I do think a driver certification program may be in our purview. And rather than have it announced, and this is a change of position for me, but rather than having it announced without our involvement, I actually think, just like in the training situation, there actually does need to be a foundation approval for somebody providing
it's the use of the word certification, not the
I would target that other thing, because certified means that there is an authority behind it that is certifying the quality. That is the essential function of a mark, is to identify the affiliated institution and associate a certain brand quality with it. I would be perfectly happy with a board some sort of board action saying that any discussion of certification of anything associated with or shipped with or
has to happen to the board first.
Concerning OpenStack must be squared with the board.
And to take that to the part of the action of that email that came through, and anything claiming that certain actions along these lines will result in code not being included as part of the OpenStack release is also purview of the board. I mean, they're saying, it won't be an eye test if it's not tested. And it's like, I think it's a board decision to come up with the rules.
There's definitely cease and desist and legal actions that can be taken for this and should be.
I mean, I want to hit a very careful balance here, because I was really conflicted when the announcement came out. I was like, look, I have always espoused rough consensus and working code. And for people to come to the table with a technical idea with some code in hand and not a bunch of requirements. We have never been a standards body. We don't draft specs. We build things. But it's really the line where you're saying, and now I am representing the authority of the OpenStack Foundation without talking to the board, that I take issue with. I was like, dude, you want to go build something awesome and say, propose for incubation in OpenStack a method of testing and certifying drivers? Awesome.
Yep.
The method, awesome. The idea that you are now in charge of certification and the board is just now hearing about it and hasn't had a discussion, and any sort of assertion of, I've talked to most of the board members already. Frankly, dude, I've been more involved in arguing about the trademark than everyone else, and that's why you didn't call me.
Right.
That's why I didn't hear about it until the announcement came out, because you knew I'd have an issue with it. So.
Well, I totally agree that a certification program really needs, that has clear trademark implications, so.
And
Okay.
it's great to get everyone to test, and it's great if someone provides a tool that makes that easier, but beyond that,
Yeah.
it's a trademark.
Yep.
And I'll take an action item to discuss that on the Legal Affairs Committee.
Okay.
But also.
It would be great, I mean, the Legal Affairs Committee, if they can report to the board on like, is it going up or down? 30 cease and desists a month? We got one, I have no idea.
You know what, we don't get that, but Mark, you're still on?
I'm still on.
Let's coordinate on some of the stats around this, and so that we can have an ongoing report to the board.
Do you get
Yep.
those tax forms? I didn't think they go through Mark either.
Mark at least should have them. I
Well,
believe that.
unfortunately, that's all managed by a different,
Yeah.
that's managed by a different law firm, so we're gonna have to go to them. So,
Okay.
I don't have that information either.
Okay, well, we'll find who it is, and we'll
And I
get
think
that.
there was actually,
But beyond just slapping them, don't just carrot and stick,
Mm-hmm.
direct them to the right program or a group.
I mean, this one is
Have
particularly,
birds of a feather.
this one's
is
particularly
egregious.
flagrant,
Yeah.
flagrant, yeah.
so a lot of that information is purposely not public, right?
Well,
So
yeah,
I know Jonathan does that.
yeah.
He doesn't just slap them. He does talk to them and work with them. But
I
it's
know-
purposely not made public.
No, she's talking more about the collaboration aspect of say, this is a great idea, you should work with
Right.
DefCore on certification, or this is,
And this
it'd be
is,
great to see this with the board.
Or
I really like this
birds of a
discussion.
feather
Yeah.
kicked off by DefCore.
I think one of the challenges, one of the reasons why originally I was much more lenient on this one was because I feel like there are elements in the community where they feel like our progress is not fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
You know what? I have heard that. I've heard our progress is not fast enough. And I've heard it, to be fair, inside of Rackspace. I've heard it outside of Rackspace. And I have to say, every time, I think that is just BS. I'm sorry.
thank you.
Yeah, because most of the times you sit down and have the conversation about what we're doing, how we're getting there, and everybody kind of goes, yeah, you really couldn't do it any other way. I mean, I think people are frustrated, they'll say it out of frustration. One thing that occurs to me, though, that is around this, and I don't know if there's a way to do this or if this is overdoing what we're talking about, but it does feel like there are certain areas, and whether we call them programs or projects or what the name is, I don't want to conflate how the TC manages things to how we think about the overall operation, but it does feel like this concept of sort of charters around programs and something that says, look, if you want to start up something that's within the charter of an existing program, you first approach that program group before you go do something else, is a reasonable thing to say, right? I mean, there are going to be a set of programs around. It's like, if you want to go do something in the compute space, you don't just go off and, build Docker as a service with an API using OpenStack without talking to Russell and the group working on Nova, right?
It's kind of like ironic. It would be appropriate to have as part of the program definition to say, the reason we're not part of this other program is X.
Right.
Because
And by the
there's a
way,
use
we
case
started
that's
by
entirely
going to
separate. Yes.
Nova, and we all
Yes.
decided this didn't fit within Nova,
Right.
and then we could go do it separately, as
Right.
opposed to, we started it, and then they complained enough, they pulled us in and sucked us under their program. I mean,
And
which is more of the way it would happen today, as opposed to the,
and I think that just to
rules of engagement.
just to wrap this back around to the idea of core and defining what is core, one of the things that I think is a little bit of an anti-pattern in the OpenStack community is that this idea of anointing something, even if we, as the project, and it's incubated, it's going to be, it's integrated, it's going to be in core, when we haven't really even figured out what the problem space is yet. And one of the things that I would really.
But it's got a project name and it's got a charter.
I actually
One
no,
of the
the
things that I
anointed
would
project
like to
phenomena is I find very disturbing.
Yeah.
I actually don't have a problem with there being tons and tons of OpenStack projects. But I've sort of been listening and piping in here and there. But ultimately, I'd like this idea of core is small and sweet and simple and very tightly defined, and then maybe we bring some other stuff in at a later point. But that is after it's sort of been vetted by the fact that people are using it for stuff. You know, the one thing that I can say for Swift and Nova is that people are using it for stuff.
Very true. So this maybe comes back on our conversation with the TC. What we could have done differently around designated sections is to say, guys, we're actually pretty sure based on how we're looking at test coverage and the capabilities that we can say are core because there's enough tests, that we're really only looking 6 projects. And I think maybe the issue was they're looking at 40 projects or 70 projects and going, oh my God, designated sections for 70 projects is crazy. And we're just thinking, oh no, it's just Nova and Swift and Glance and Keystone and Cinder and Neutron. And we're done. Because those are the only things that we have enough tests for and enough people using that we can say are probably core.
Yeah, they're even in consideration.
I think that's a good point.
Even then, I think Neutron and some others are on the bubble.
Neutron's still in the bubble. We'll see.
Actually, no, you're right. That changes. Michael, I don't know if you're still on, but that was an important insight.
I think so.
Is that it's not 100%.
I'm still on, and I think that is a good point. Like you need to remember, for example, the reason PTLs aren't by default on the TC anymore is because there's a billion of them.
Yes.
You know, it's just got too big a group of people to be able to achieve anything ever. So, if we limited to say, look, you know, we're currently interested in these 6 projects only, that would make the conversation easier, I think.
Right. And that's actually why when we specified PTLs, not TC, is the idea was you own that code base, you're responsible for that code base. You know your code base and can specify it, whereas the TC should be designing principles of it.
I mean, maybe that's a conclusion we need to actually record at some point, is this idea that, look, even from what we know already, we can narrow down and say, anything outside of this is really not being.
I'll go back and add
I think that would be a good.
I think we all sort of know that, but I don't know that we've definitively stated that at any point.
Yeah.
And I think it would be very interesting to go for even to the board meeting tomorrow and say, from this committee and say, by the way, we're doing all these things. Here are some criteria. Based upon this criteria, we are only actively evaluating the following for core.
Right.
Some of these are even on the bubble and may not make it.
Yeah, so you don't have to super worry about
And
designated sections for stuff.
And then you put it out in an
and
email
so
on
I think that,
OpenStack Dev.
and even if that is that's part of what is okay per Rob's point to be further noised about.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that would
Exactly.
actually add a lot of clarity to a lot of people.
Yep, exactly. I think you're right.
Really good point.
So the other, sorry to go back 19 conversations as well, but the other thing that has only just occurred to me is PTLs also change relatively frequently. So you also have to work out how to mitigate this risk that one PTL has a particular belief about how free for pluggability a thing should be versus the new person in 6 months who completely disagrees and wants to change all the rules. So I think there is value in involving the TC because it's more consistent over time, hopefully, than individual PTLs who may or may not run on political platforms.
Yeah, I agree with you about the concern.
What do we do when the current Nova PTL says, yes, you know, I designate this bit of the code and say Piston goes and builds a whole product offering based on that belief. And then 6 months later, I get elected and I disagree with the previous guy and I'm like, no, I'm going to pull the blanket out from underneath Piston's feet, right? Not to pick on Piston, but this is a risk that you create.
Yeah.
So we have some criteria scoring on how we're looking at capabilities that
I
is
think
intended to
I think you're thinking more about designation.
Oh, no,
So
fair enough.
actually, Michael, what I was hoping to do
Yeah.
with you one-on-one was actually, and I think Josh has got this off to a really good start, is come back and look at some principles that seem like we could apply and see if we can come up with 5 or 6 sort of governing principles for that.
Yeah.
Because that makes it much more objective. And then, since we already have now a draft list of what the designated sections are, we can sort of test, it's pretty easy to do a test like we're doing with the capabilities.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, I wonder if, something around those principles, because we have some things in there around must be stable for a couple of releases, must be widely, I mean, there ought to be something around the changing of the designated code stuff that prevents this sort of, all of a sudden in Havana, you've got, 80% more code you've got to require, and you got to rewrite your product if you want to keep open.
Well, this is why what we'd originally asked the TC for was not designated sections, but an approach to defining them. And I think that, and maybe
that's what I reiterated in my letter.
And that might have been the confusion we produced, was they thought we were asking for a very technical, how would you keep track of this, when we were asking for more of the versioning and controls on it. And I do really think, the approach I sort of took in this draft of saying, if the designated section is the API and the replaceable section is the scheduler, those are high-level categories that I think we could just say, that's it for Nova. This is not a question we're going to revisit. This is a decision that is not a per-release decision. It's this component at the creation of the module, and by module I mean something that runs as a binary at runtime. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the most...
Yeah. But we can also put a proposal around this. The PTL can make a recommendation, and the PTL can thumbs up or thumbs down it. The PTL can make recommendations. The TCs can thumbs up or thumbs down it.
Yeah, I think there's a process that we could come up with that would make sense. We just want it to be fairly hard to change, so there isn't a ton of trouble.
Also, I would like to propose you think about DefCore and RefStack being part of the quality program as opposed to the infra program, because it's the quality, it's keeping the quality to the point that it ensures the trademark, the brand name is still respectable.
We do have a lot of tie into to Tempest currently, which is an existing QA program. So.
I strongly agree with you. I think the reason we keep thinking infra is because we need somebody to run RefStack, and that's why we keep hunting it. That's
the irony is, Piston right now is running RefStack and running infra for Cloud Foundry. Not that we want to be in the business of doing this, but HP is running all of infra for OpenStack, for most of it, right? So. And Rackspace.
All right, so we're quite a ways over. I usually like to conclude on time.
Maybe we need to do this instead of infra.
But I have to say this.
Did we get all the way through?
Yeah, this has been a really refreshing discussion. I think.
Michael, thanks for putting up with this in particular.
Yeah,
those
Michael,
of you that did it well, and you're on the phone. I've been on the phone for these long meetings. It's not the best time, especially when most people are in person. But you've done a good job of representing the TC participating in a very positive way. So thank you.
Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
All right. So with that, we're going to conclude.
All right.
It'd be nice to have another meeting.
We didn't have the alcohol check.
Oh, we'll do that. That's next.
Michael, did you get something to drink?
We did not close the agenda.
I got tea in the morning.
A cup of tea, does that count?
Was there any whiskey in the tea?
No, but you see, the sun's only just gone over the yard arm, so I promise to go and get drunk now.
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
Okay.
That passes.
That's fair.
Cheers.
All right, bye.